Well, hello again, chess fans. So today we're gonna start with our endgame course. So what we will be doing in this endgame course is I will be showing you guys basically just, the most important things you need to know about all kinds of different types of endgames. So we're gonna start with pawn endgames and we're gonna keep it easy. And we're gonna focus in the beginning on one of the most important things about king and pawns versus king and pawns, okay? And that is how important and how strong the king suddenly becomes. Because there's no, checkmates, because there's no high ranky, because there's no, obvious easy checkmates, because there's only pawns left on the board, then, the king becomes a much more important piece to be used. So the first thing I want to show you guys is just the concept of opposition. Okay. Opposition is when two kings are standing across from each other fighting for basically a new rank. Okay, so if we look at this is the rank. Okay, and what you'll notice is that whoever has to move in this position, in other words, whoever has the opposition, if you have to move, then I have the opposition, and if I have to move, then you have the opposition. But anyway, whoever has to move has to give way to one of the yellow squares, like in this example. So if it's white to play, then black can now come forward with his king. Okay, so if the fight was for the fourth rank, in this case, then of course black now would be able to penetrate the fourth rank, because it doesn't really matter where the king goes, the black king would be able to come onto one of those squares. If the king goes backwards, then of course the black king would just be able to go here and again take opposition. And again, now if white has to move, he has to give away one of these squares. Hello guys, hello Walid Mujahid. There we go. Let's see if I can say that right. Okay, so that is just called opposition. Okay, now there are 5 different types of opposition. This is just normal opposition. Then we have side opposition. So of course now we are fighting for these squares with the 2 kings. Whoever has to move gives away one of the green squares. Okay, so if those squares are important, then of course side opposition is obviously very important for yourself. Then there is also diagonal opposition. So of course now they are just diagonal from each other, and again, if these squares are important, then whoever has to move has to give one of these squares up, or give into another type of opposition. So if you go, let's say here, I get opposition. If you go, let's say here, I get side opposition. If you go, let's say backwards, I can get diagonal opposition again, but I have moved forward with my king. If you go king here, I can get opposition again, and now I'm hitting these 3 squares. So it just becomes a battle for squares in the end. Okay, so that was the third one. So we have normal opposition, which is just like this one on the board now. Then we have side opposition, which is basically when they are across sideways from each other. Let me see if I can get it. No, no, that one. There we go. Now side opposition, and of course this one is diagonal opposition. And the fourth one is called distant opposition. Now you'll see that there's 3 squares between us, but the squares that we're really fighting for is those. Whoever has to move, again, does not have opposition. So if it's white's to move and he comes forward, then black will take the opposition, and now white has to move away and give us one of these squares. Let me just quickly update my chat. Okay, and if any other moves, like let's say white goes this way, then we can take diagonal opposition, and now again we're fighting for these squares, so I'm going to get one of them. If white goes, let's say this side, then we can just go king here, because again, now he cannot come here to take opposition. So if he goes here, then we did get onto the squares like we started with, the fight, as you can see. If he goes, let me just go back. If he goes here and we go here, then of course any square he goes to, we can get opposition. If he comes forward, we already go onto one of the squares that we are aiming at. If he comes here, then we just take opposition. We again take there. And if he goes here, then of course we take over already. And now we're also hitting these 3 squares. So that is distant opposition. So we have normal opposition, side opposition, diagonal opposition, distant opposition, and then the last one, which is a bit more tricky one, which is called virtual opposition. Okay, so let me just draw a nice little box. Okay, but again, the squares we're fighting for are those. So virtual opposition is basically like distant diagonal opposition. Okay, so if you look at the board here, the yellow squares are the ones we're fighting for. So if white tries to attack any of the squares, like let's say he goes here, we go here, and again, like we said, these squares are what we're fighting for, and black comes past and gets onto one of those squares. If white goes here, then black takes normal opposition, and if he goes here, then black takes distant opposition, in which case now again, if he goes to a side, we can come forward, because of course he cannot play opposition here because his king is on the wrong file now. So that is just, we're going to use this, so you'll see why it's important to know about all the kinds of opposition. Okay, now let's move on to our first position. Okay, so here we have a king and pawn versus king endgame. Of course, if white can get the pawn to the other side, he can get a queen, and this is how he'll win. Yeah, that's okay, Scranky. That's okay. I mean, obviously, people say that they made mistakes in the opening, but the Russian way of thinking about chess is to start from the back and work your way to the opening. And the reason for this is because the end game will help you to be able to calculate further ahead because there's less pieces on the board. So in a position like this, I can calculate all the way, for if I have to play the best moves for both players, then I can calculate this position all the way probably to mate. All the way, from this position all the way to mate, if I only play the best moves for white and black, of course. Then I can tell you what or how many moves it will take to mate. Okay, now here we have to start with 3 rules that you need in order to win with a king and pawn versus king endgame like this. There are 3 rules. The first rule is you want to have your king in front of the pawn. That's rule number 1. King in front of the pawn. The second rule is you want to have opposition. Okay? The third rule is you want to have your king either on the 6th rank, or if you were black and we flipped the board around, then you would have wanted your king on the 3rd rank if you were black with the pawn, of course. Okay, now, in order to win this, you only need 2 out of the 3 rules to be able to win. So you either need your king in front of the pawn with opposition, or you need your king in front of the pawn with your king to the 6th rank, or you need opposition and your king on the 6th rank. So 2 out of 3. That's what you're going to need. Hello, Christian. And welcome to the stream. Okay, so now if we start playing for white, we already know that we want our king in front of the pawn. So let's make, the obvious move, okay? Now what we're going to try and do for black is we're going to try and keep opposition for black. So look at something like this, okay? This is like very, very far distant opposition here, okay? So black is going to try and be sneaky, of course, and make your life hard. So let's say we go forward, you go forward, we go forward, and black takes the opposition. Let's say you go here, you go here. So now black has the opposition, okay? But we have our king in front of the pawn. And now what we can do is to force to get opposition is we can move our pawn. That's why it's always important to leave your pawn as far back as possible, so that if your opponent suddenly gets opposition, like he has now, because if we play here, he's just going to keep the opposition, as you can see, and we're not making any progress. Okay? So what you want to do is you can just move the pawn, because now, of course, white suddenly has the opposition, because black has to move. Okay? Nice and simple. Now if black moves, of course, he has to give us one of these squares. So let's say he goes here, we take, he goes, let's say here, we go opposition again. Okay? If he goes here, we can just go forward. Because of course our goal is to get here, which will support the pawn all the way through. Now if he goes here, we play here, and the king can't go here anymore. So now we can just shuffle all the way through, or of course here we could just play here. But now if you play here, you can come back, and he again threatens to attack your pawn. So now you're going to have to go back. So here, here, and here of course, we just take opposition again. Okay, king moves out of the way, and now you are finally ready to promote your pawn. So, let's go back a little bit. If he goes, let's say if he goes, like I said there, we can just take opposition again. He goes here, we take opposition. If he comes forward, we push the pawn. We stop him from coming here. Goes back, pawn push, king goes there, and there. There we go. Now, again, we have opposition. We have our king to the 6th rank, and our king is in front of the pawn, so this is obviously an easy win. What if, okay, let me just go back. What if we played the mistake and we played here? Now black will take the opposition, and now you can see why you need 2 out of 3. Do we have 2 out of 3 right now? We don't have our king in front of the pawn. We don't have opposition because it's our move. And of course, our king is on the 6th rank. Okay, so we have 1 out of 3. And now the problem becomes if you push the pawn, it will be stalemate. So that is the issue. Okay, and if we move our king, then all he has to do is sit in front of our pawn, because we can't take opposition when he goes to e8. So let's say king goes here, we go e8, and his king can't go on top of his own pawn. Now if he goes either this way or this way, we're going to go either that way or that way and take opposition again. So you can again never win this endgame. Hello, the chess one. So let's go back all the way. So of course, as long as we keep 2 of the rules, we are perfectly safe. So this is an easy example, obviously, of winning. You get your king in front of the pawn. If he takes opposition, you push your pawn to get the opposition back. You push him back, you queen your pawn. Okay, simple one. Let me just replace that one as well. Cool. Now the next one. Okay, so here, let me just make sure who's it to move. Okay, so here we go. It is white to play. Okay, now you can see black has taken the opposition. So how many rules do we have here? We have our king in front of the pawn. Okay. We do not have opposition, and we do not have our king on the 6th rank. So that should mean that it should be a draw. What happens? We go king, he takes opposition. If we push the pawn, he sits in front of the pawn where we cannot take opposition. That is always the problem. Now, if you push the pawn again, let's say, he just again goes to a square where you cannot take opposition. So you still can't take opposition. Now, if your king comes forward, he takes opposition, and you still only have 1 of the 3 rules. Now you only have your king on the 6th rank. So this is still a draw. Okay. Now, let's go to the next example. This is, who's to play? Okay, it's white to move here, yes. Okay, so here, we do still have 2 rules. With white to play, we have the king on the 6th rank, and our king is still in front of the pawn. But we do not have opposition, which is the only little lost trick in this endgame. Okay, so what you're going to do is now, if you're white to play, you can just push your pawn, because now if the king goes here, you can just push your pawn again. That is the trick here, because now the king can't go to opposition, he has to go here, and of course we just queen the pawn. So if you're in the position where your king is in front of your pawn and you're on the 6th rank, but he has opposition, you can just shove your pawn. Okay. If the pawn, of course, was 1 square down, you could just play king here, he goes king, and then you would push your pawn to get opposition again. Okay, not too hard. I think you guys probably understand the idea of opposition and the 3 rules. The 3 rules are extremely important, knowing that you need your king in front of the pawn, you need opposition, and you want to get your king to the 6th rank. And if you have 2 out of 3, then you can win the endgame with the pawn. Okay, now let's look at this one. This one is for white to play. Okay, so now the question is, I ask you guys, it's white to play. How many rules does black have in the current position? Let's see if anybody can tell me. How many rules does black have in the position? Out of the 3, how many does he have? There's a bit of a delay, so I have to wait a little. Can anyone tell me? How many rules does black currently have with white to play? Remember, it's white to play. Yeah, he either has 0 or no, or 1. But he does have 1, because if it's white to play, then of course he has distant opposition. Okay, now what would white play? Of course there are some exceptions. There's always exceptions. Yeah, he has opposition. Great. But now if white is to play, what would white play? See if anybody can find white's move. No, king e2 would be bad. Why would king e2 be bad? If king e2 gets played, then black can play king e4, taking opposition, and now his king is in front of the pawn. So now suddenly black has two of the rules. 2 out of 3. Where he only had 1, he will now have 2 out of 3. Now you play here, I play here, you play here, I play here, you play here, let's say, you go there, and of course, now I just push the pawn. Oops. So king e2 is a very, very bad move. You have to make sure that he cannot get his king in front of the pawn and have opposition at the same time. So what else can white play? Anyone? What else can white play? Just stick to the rules. We know that black has opposition. Where does white's king need to be so that black cannot take opposition? In this case, it's distant opposition, but that's not the point. Opposition is opposition. As long as you just remember the 5 different oppositions, then the rest is easy. So our square that we want to get to is this one. C1 is the important square because, of course, he cannot take opposition because his own pawn is in the way. So let's look at something like king d1. Okay. Now, if he comes forward, let's say king here, we take opposition. Now he's got his king in front of the pawn, but he does not have a position, and his king is not on the 6th rank. So this is again a draw. If he pushes his pawn, we put it in front of the pawn. Now we cannot go and get opposition anymore. He pushes the pawn, we go in front of the pawn because now again he cannot get opposition. So this will be a draw. If he comes forward like this, let's say, now we can take opposition diagonally, and we stay in front of the pawn. Okay, now if he goes king, let's say here, we just take opposition again, and we have that same position. So after king d1, the only way for black to keep opposition is to play king d5. Okay, to have distant opposition again. But after the move king c1, of course, now he cannot take opposition again because his pawn is in his own way. So that is why the rules are important. We saw immediately at the start that black only had one rule. He only had opposition. And this is how white can save the game, because he can get in front of the pawn when you cannot get opposition. Now again, if you come forward, I take opposition. If you come here, I go here. If you come here, I go there. If you go there, I still go there. So simple. There, I take opposition, you only have one rule. There, I take opposition, you only have one rule. There, I take opposition here, and you still only have one rule. So this will be a draw. So the key is to stick in front of the pawn. Okay, so that's how you're going to draw. If you want to try and draw this, then you have to make sure that you do not give him 2 out of 3 rules. Okay, let's see another one. Here we go. Okay, this one's for white to play and win. Let's see if anybody can get the right idea for white. I'll have a sip of Powerade. Still the same bottle from last night. So does anybody have an idea? Okay, Skranky says E2, huh? E2. Okay. I'm gonna play your moves, okay? And I'll play for black. I just wanna see. Go here. You play for white again. Come on, what's the next move, Mr. Skranky? Okay, king d3, and now what happens? I take distant opposition, and you are not in front of your pawn, and you don't have opposition. So now suddenly it's a draw. Okay, good. Now king e3 would be a better plan at least. Okay, now I go king here, and now what? You're going to have the same problem, you see. If your king comes forward, I take opposition, and you still only have one rule. You only have your king in front of the pawn. If you go king e4, then I take opposition in front of the pawn, and I take diagonal opposition. You see, now again, if your king comes closer, I take opposition, and again, you cannot win this. Aha, Walid, my man, my man. Okay, so Walid says, instead of giving the king the chance to kick us off here, why don't we run the other way around our pawn? So look at this. King c2, king comes here, king b2, king goes here, let's say, then we take our position diagonally, and we have our king in front of the pawn. Now suddenly, we have two rules. If he goes here, we take our position, he goes back, and we obviously know how to win from here. Now let's see if black can try and do it any other way. If black tries, let's say something like that, okay? Now, of course, the only thing we don't want to do is give him opposition. So a move like king c4 is bad because then he gets opposition. So we just play king b4. Now, of course, no matter where he goes, if he goes here, we can just push up. If he goes here, we can take the opposition. And if he goes here, we can take opposition. Perfect. So we have 2 out of 3 rules and we know we can win this from here. So yes, sometimes you have to just make sure which way around the pawn do you go to get in front of it. Very good, Walid. Very well done. So you have to look at all your options. Okay. Because the problem is with king forward is that he ends up getting in front of your king when you are stuck next to your pawn and you can't take opposition. That's the problem. So he gets opposition and now you end up drawing the game instead of winning it. Okay. Very good. Now, okay, so that was basically it. Okay, I don't want to take forever to go on about, king and pawn versus king endgames. If you remember the rules, okay, get your king in front of the pawn, get opposition, and get your king to the 6th rank. If you get 2 out of 3, there's a child knocking on my door. So if you can get 2 out of the 3 rules, then you can win it. Okay, now I just wanted to show what happens if you have a side pawn, an A pawn or an H pawn. Okay, so the rules for this is pretty simple, much easier. Okay, if black's king is in front of the pawn, then it's a draw. There's not much you can do about it, it's going to be a draw. The only way you can win for white is if you can control either these 2 squares, or if you're the other pawn, if it was an H pawn, you'd have to control these 2 squares with your king, so your king has to be there to obviously block the black king out so that you can queen your pawn. Okay? So that's a simple one. Okay, zip boy. Oh, apparently it's my dog. Just hold on, let me just close the door. Yes, my dog opens doors. He is genius that way. Okay, so this one was quite easy. Let me just move on to the next one, and then we can do a little bit of calculation. Okay, so here we have a situation where the black king is quite far away from the H-file. So my question here is, if it's white to play, can white win this game? And if so, how? What is the plan? See if anybody's going to give me an answer. Nope, king g4 is too slow. King g4 is too slow. Okay, remember, in these endgames with a side pawn, either side, your most important thing is that you have to get your king to one of these 2 squares. Exactly. So if we play king g5, he brings his king in, we play king g6, he brings his king in, we play king g7, and now of course there's no way to stop the pawn. The king has to run around here to try and get to the pawn. So let's say king, pawn, king, pawn. He's not in time to stop the pawn. Okay. Now, if it's black to play on the other hand, then suddenly it's not a win anymore. I'm going to, I think I did put it as a position. Yes. Now it's black to play. Now if black gets to play, he gets to control these 2 squares first. So king here, king here, king here, king here, and king here. Now your king can't get to any of these 2 squares. So now you can look at something like, let's say, king here, okay? Then he plays opposition, okay? If you go king here, he just goes back. Why? Because he's just controlling these two squares. Let's say you go king here, he goes back. King here, he goes back. King up, he goes there. Here, then you stalemate yourself. See, so he just traps your king on the side of the board, and of course there's nowhere to go. If your king obviously runs out, like let's say there, if your king runs here, he can just play his king here, and then sit on these two squares indefinitely. Okay? So yes, the only way you can win is if you can control that square or that square for the pawn to be pushed through. Okay, not too hard. The rook pawns are fairly simple to figure out. Okay, great. Here we have a nice little tricky variation. So let's see if you guys can figure out what white should play to win. Of course, white's pawns are going up. Let's see. Anybody have an idea? B6 checks, just draws. Because he just takes this pawn. And then he just comes back again for the other one. No way to save that. Okay, king, what now? King e6. Okay, and if I go here, now what do you play, Walid? Ooh, somebody thinks it's a draw. Chester, you think it's a draw? This is why remembering the 3 rules is very important. Now, most of you will see if you play b6 now, then it's stalemate. Yes, Walid, it's stalemate. That's the problem. You can see that the king has nowhere to go. So that would be stalemate. If you play king here, it's also stalemate. But this pawn is not important. That pawn is not important. Aha. So, if we play king d5, okay, and the king takes the pawn, what is our current situation from a 3 rules point of view? Okay? After the move, okay, well, never mind. It is now white to play. How many rules does he have currently? Can anyone tell me how many rules does white have in the current position with his move to be played? Hello, Gobstop. Well, actually, yeah, he currently has absolutely 0. He doesn't have his king on the 6th rank. He does not have opposition because it's his move. And he doesn't have his king in front of the pawn. So he's got absolutely 0. He's got no rules. Okay. But somebody said if we play b6, now, how many rules do we suddenly have now? Because the king is going to have to move. The king can only go here or here. I mean, if it goes there, we can just queen. So those are the 2 squares he's going to go to. So after the king moves, let's say to c6, or c8, and we go to c6, how many rules do we have then? So king here, king here. How many rules do we have now? Come on, how many rules? Come on. It's not hard to count. We have our king on the 6th rank, and we just took opposition. So we have 2 rules, so now we know we can win it. The king goes here, we just push the pawn because the king now cannot go to these 2 squares. There. This is actually a very quick mate. Get a queen, king goes here, you just pop the queen back here, and he has to go back, and it's mate. Okay, so it's a transposition where we have to realize that after moving our king to e6, he plays here, we have to sacrifice the pawn. But by playing king d5, Go away. By playing king d5 and he takes, we can take all the rules back by playing b6. Because, of course, this square is covered by our king, and this square is covered by the pawn. So now, sadly, he has to go back to c8, and then we get to play the opposition and have our king on the 6th rank. So we get to put our king on the 6th rank with opposition. That's basically what it comes down to. If he plays here, then we go king here, and we get the 6th rank and opposition. So we have 2 out of 3 rules. Okay. So a little bit of a tricky trickster one for you guys there. Cool. Let's move on to the next pawn endgame. Okay, so this is the last ones from the king and a pawn versus a king. But this is now a double pawn. Can anyone tell me if this is a win for black? And if so, why is it a win for black? Let me just refresh my chat just in case, because I don't know if anybody's chatting. And I'm back. Oh, come on, reconnect now. There we go. Okay, can anyone tell me whether this is a win for black or not? And if so, how does black go about winning? Ooh, okay, so Walid says it looks like a draw. Okay, anyone else? No, it's not always white to move. Not always, of course. This one is actually white to play, I think. Yeah, but it's good that it's white to play, because if white to play, then he can take the opposition. Not that it really matters who's to play in this position, by the way. If it's black to play or white to play, it doesn't matter. Makes no difference. Not to the results, anyway. Anybody else gonna stick out their neck with a result? No, no, no takers. Okay, Skranky says black's gonna win. Okay, Skranky, you are on the right track. No, you know what? This. Okay, the problem with an endgame, if this pawn was gone, is that, of course, in the end, when you get your pawn to d2, you're going to end up having a stalemate. Okay? You're gonna stalemate. But here, you have an extra pawn. So when it gets to the stalemate position, you can just use your extra pawn to make a move. So something like this. Even if it's white to play, let's look at that. There. Okay. Typical position without this pawn. Okay, king goes here, we go here, king goes here, king up and here. And now if we didn't have this pawn, we obviously would draw, because we either have to lose the pawn or play king d3, which would be a draw. But now we can just push the pawn, forcing him to play his king out. And of course, now we can go here and we can just promote. So the key in this endgame, and again, if it was black to move, it wouldn't make any difference. Black would have the exact same strategy. He just moves his king all the way up with his pawn to the point where it would be stalemate if he didn't have the extra pawn. Hello, chess guy. Okay. Yeah, well done, Skranky. You called it. You called the victory for black. Well done. Okay, so that is the simple way of doing it. You leave your pawn as far back behind, and you use your king and pawn to get to the last stop. By the way, this is just a little chess jargon for you. This is called the last stop. Yes, you just need the extra move. Correct, Walid. You just need that extra move. That's all. Because, of course, you know, without the pawn, you don't have the extra move, and it's stalemate. But now with the extra move, you can force his king to move out, and then you can queen. Yes. So anyway, when you get your pawn to the last square before it promotes, we just call it the last stop. Okay. So, of course, now by getting to the last stop, if you obviously play king here, then it would be a stalemate if you didn't have this pawn. Okay. But now we can just move the pawn, he's forced out, and we can queen. Nice and easy. Oh, okay, Chester, I see. Okay, now I'm going to give you guys a little bit more of a tricky one. It's the same concept, but it's a bit trickier. Okay, this one's for white to play, and white needs to win this. So it all comes down to the concept of having the double pawn. So can anybody tell me if white can win this endgame? Yeah, it's very much the same. But you'll see why it's not exactly the same. Possibly. Why don't you just send it to me? Yeah. On chess.com. Chess guy. You can just send it to me on chess.com. Okay. Okay. So, I'm going to show you guys where we start. Of course, we need to win the pawn first. Okay. We have to go for the pawn. So, king f1, king here, king e2, and king d4. Okay, okay, chess guy. I'll try and remember because, well, I will have some time before the stream, so it's okay. I'll have about an hour or so before the stream, so then I'll try and get all the extra, paperwork and stuff in order as well. Okay, now we push the pawn, yes. King goes to e4. Now, what do we have to play for white now? What do we have to play for white now? Perfect. Well done, Gobstop. Okay, you can quickly see that the pawns actually do a pretty decent job at blocking the king from the side. So the black king cannot come from the side because, of course, the pawns block him out by being behind each other. Okay, now he plays king here. What do we play now for white? Good. Okay, g5. King goes here. Now what? It's unanimous. g5. So the king goes to e5. What do we play now for white? How's that? g4, exactly. Why? Because they're protecting themselves. If the king ever goes here to attack them, then of course we can just push the one and he's gone. There's no way to survive. Okay? So now he plays king e6. We of course take. He goes king here. Now what is the correct move for white? It is. It is a nice, yeah. The pawns protect each other from the side. Like kicking the king away from the side. Ah, Gobstop, you finally get the wrong move. You were doing so well. You were doing so well. King f4 is a mistake. Because if king f4, then king g6. And now you're going to lose this pawn and you are not going to have 2 out of the 3 rules. Oops. So, king e4 is correct. Exactly. Now, if he goes king g6, you can play king f4. So you have to be very careful. But this is not over yet, guys. This is not over yet. And you're going to see why. There's a little trick still here as well, because it is a G file pawns. Okay? If it was in the center, anywhere here, if the pawns were anywhere here, it's much easier. And of course, if the pawns were on the side of the board, then we know it would be a draw. Even if you have 5 of them, it would still be a draw. Okay? So now the king goes to g7. Now we have to use the fact that we have the extra pawn when we need a tempo. Or do we? So king goes up and he takes opposition. We play pawn, he takes there, we take opposition. He plays king there, we play king here, he plays here, we play here, and he plays there. And now, what now? There's one more trick in the game. So what did we say before? We now obviously don't have to stalemate. So what do we play now? Okay, g5, and king goes here. And now you have to be extremely careful, because what can you not do anymore? That would be a draw. g6 draws. If you go here, I go here, and now again you lose this pawn. You lose that pawn. Yes, you cannot promote. So you can't play here because it's stalemate. This is why I say that when it's a G or double B pawn, then you have to be careful of this trick, because the king obviously can't run onto the I file because there is no I file. So, what do we play for white? What do we play for white? Now just think about it from another point of view. Think about it from a three-rule point of view again. All we need is three rules. Okay, good. So somebody says G8. We can take a queen, doesn't matter. King takes, and what do we play for white now? Just to make sure we have two out of the three rules. We actually have all three of them. Exactly. So this is a case where we sacrifice the pawn in front so that we can get a winning game with king g6. Exactly. Now, of course, it doesn't matter where the king goes. We just queen the pawn. Perfect. Hopefully he goes to h8 because it's quicker, because then we just made him much quicker. King goes here, queen goes here, queen goes here, and mate. That's it. Yeah, that one is not so easy, exactly. So one has to first realize that the pawns can protect themselves from, from the king. Same with the next position. Nice protection, again. And then you have to realize that you can't play king f4 when he can play king g6. So you must give yourself that position first. And then you have to realize that you cannot play our usual idea with g5 and king up, because otherwise it's stalemate, of course. Okay, so then you have to realize you have to sacrifice your front pawn to get a winning king and pawn in game. Very, very nice one. Okay, save that one. Just want to keep an eye on the time because I also don't want to take too long. Okay, good. That was all the king and pawn versus king. Yeah, king, one piece, one pawn type of ideas. Now we're going to start looking at some king and pawn versus king and pawn endgames. Okay. So here again, it's a question of who is to move. Okay. Now let me ask you, if it's white to move here, can white win this endgame? Sorry, I just reconnected to the chat quickly, so I might have missed some of your chats. Can white win if it's white to play? Damn you, tablet. Damn you to hell. Why is it not opening up? Come on. Sorry, I'm just trying to open up my chat again. My tablet kicked me out of the chat. There we go. I'm back again. Jeez, it took forever. So, see, this is why you need two screens, because then you can have chat on one screen and you can do your thing on the other screen. Trebuchet. I like that word. It's a nice one. White cannot win if it's white to play. Are you sure? Would you like to take another chance at that one? Okay, it's actually a win for white. If white can get his king here, then remember he will have his king in front of the pawn and his king on the 6th rank, so it doesn't matter if there is opposition or not. So if it's white to play, white actually win this. Yes. So if king e5, now it doesn't really matter. Let's say he tries to hold on to the pawn for now. There. We just keep on attacking. There, and there. Now remember, he's got opposition, but we do have our king in front of the pawn, and of course our king is on the 6th rank as well. So let's say he plays king here again. We go king here. Sorry, this way. Wait, why is it not my move? Oh, I moved it back. Sorry, it's white to play, yeah. So white goes here. Let's say he goes here. We go pawn push. He goes here, and we push the pawn. Okay? And now, again, the king has to come out, and of course, we can go to f7, and we will win. There we go. Nice one. Nice analysis there. Well done. Well done, Chester. Well done. Okay, perfect. Now, if it is black to play, however, in this position, did I do the right thing and make it black to play in the next one? No, I did not. Okay, if it's black to play, can black win this endgame? Well, black actually can do the same, of course. Let's make it black to move quickly. Let me just make it black to move. Black can do the exact same thing to him, but there's a bit of an issue. Is that he does not have 2 out of 3 rules once he wins the pawn. Because now white has the opposition, and of course, he does have his king in front of the pawn, but his king is not on the 6th rank. So it doesn't win. That's the problem. Because white has just taken the opposition, and now of course the problem is he can never get his king in front of the pawn anymore again. So like that, king here, just sticking on a square where he cannot take opposition, and opposition is taken once again. So because the king eventually takes the pawn, but is not on the 6th rank, or in this case the 3rd rank, in this case there, it's not a win. Whereas in the starting position with white, white actually does get to the 6th rank instead as well. So yes, it's a draw if it's black to play. As long as white does not stuff it up, then it's a draw. Okay, perfect. I am going to... Ooh, I'm going to kill that one. Now where'd my thing go? It's all gone now. Okay, next position. Sorry, let me just do that. There we go, perfect. Should be fine. Okay, so this is something that I want to just try and explain a little bit about. Okay, here again, it all depends who it is to move. Okay, this is called, very, very tough word to say here. This is called reciprocal zugzwang. Okay, if you don't know what zugzwang is yet, zugzwang is basically a position where whoever has to move loses. Now in this case, or if your opponent, like let's say I am in a zugzwang, it means that if anything I move will end up losing the game for me. Okay? Now reciprocal zugzwang means that either way, you or me, whoever has to move, loses. So of course, if it's white to play here, then he has to move away from defending his pawn, and then of course, the black king will take the pawn, and his king is already in front of the pawn, so let's say something like that. There, and of course there, pawn push, king here, opposition. And of course he has the winning endgame. Okay. So that is a reciprocal. Now of course if it was black to play, same thing would happen. Black would move, we take the pawn, we move our king, we push the pawn. Simple. Okay. So that is called reciprocal. This position is called reciprocal zugzwang, because either player, whoever has to move, loses. Okay. Now we're going to take it one square back. There you go. So now we've just moved the kings one square or one file further away, and now we have the issue of whoever moves first actually wins now, as long as he makes the correct move. Okay, because he can end up to get into the reciprocal zugzwang position. So if it's white to play, white would not attack here, because otherwise black would get reciprocal zugzwang, and now white has to move and he loses his pawn. So instead, white would attack the pawn from here, and now unfortunately black has to play here, and then white forces reciprocal zugzwang. Oh, you don't see the board? Really? My bad. Uh-oh. I broke it. I broke it again. Okay, I'll go back. Let me just do this. See, I should never do that changing of the position thing. I should never do that. Okay, let me go back. No. There we go. Okay. Yeah, I broke it. I keep on breaking it. I shouldn't do that. I know I shouldn't do that, but I keep on doing that. Okay. I have to remember that. I can't set up a position midway, otherwise I mess it up. Okay. Yeah, I know. Save the internet. Okay, so here again, like I was saying, this is called reciprocal zugzwang. Okay? When either player has to move, will lose. So an example like that, we would just obviously get there and take opposition, and now we have our king on the 3rd rank, we have the king in front of the pawn, and we have opposition. So, yeah, I know, that's why I'm starting all the way from the beginning. So, and of course if it was black to play, then black would have to move his king away, and we would take his pawn, and the same thing would happen. Okay, so this is called reciprocal, yeah, still a mutual zugzwang, exactly. Reciprocal zugzwang is what it's called. to be fancy. We have to be fancy, guys. Okay, now let me just save that and go back to the position that was more interesting. So here we have the same situation, except now we have a file before we get to the pawn. Now it's interesting because in this situation, whoever moves actually wins. And they win by attacking the pawn, the opponent's pawn, but not by attacking it and defending its own pawn. So if you play here, then black would play here and he would get zugzwang, and now if you move, you lose your pawn. Instead, you would attack the pawn from behind, like that. Now he doesn't have a choice. He has to play king here to protect his pawn. And now, of course, you get reciprocal zugzwang. And that would be the end of the game for him. Okay. Now, there's one more position that I wanted to just show you before we end, is that if this only works, reciprocal zugzwang in that specific position when two pawns are in front of each other only works, okay, if both kings are already in front of their pawn. So let's go back. Here, white's king, as you can see, white's king is in front of his pawn, okay? Pawn is in the back, he's in front of his pawn. Whereas black's king is also in front of his pawn. So now we go back to the following position again. Now we can see that black's king is in front of his pawn, of course, but white's king is not in front of his pawn. So now it doesn't matter who has to move, it's actually a draw. If it's white to play, white wouldn't go here because of that, of course. So white just goes back, and even after losing the pawn, king goes here, take opposition. You do not have 2 out of the 3 rules. That is it. And if it was black to play, the same thing would apply. He would just attack the pawn. We'd get here, and we would let him take the pawn so we can get our king to d2, just like this situation. And that would be a draw. Okay. So that was that. I think that is where we are stopping. Yes, that is where we are stopping. Okay. So, cool. That took me about 50 minutes. It was supposed to take about an hour, so that's perfect. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Tomorrow, I'm going to continue on. So every day I'm going to do a section. Tomorrow I'm going to do on a little bit more complicated pawn endgames. So we're going to add a couple of more pawns, and that's going to be the last show on pawn endgames. So this was your basic idea, so you can just know about opposition, which is very important, and about all the zugzwang positions that you can get as well. You'll see how they all tie in when you add more pawns to the board as well. Okay. Hello, chess guy. Wait, why did your color change? You went to blue now. Why do you have no sound? Okay, but it's your fault, not mine, I assume, yeah? As long as it's your fault and not mine, then it's okay. Okay, guys, I will see you guys in about 40 minutes or so. Trust me. Yes, it is today's Cranky. You do not want to miss the Who's That GM show, which starts in, about 40 minutes or so? 6:30 p.m. CET. You guys will have to come and watch and see. You guys will have to come and watch and see. Thank you guys so much. I will see you guys in about 40 minutes. Okay. Adios, amigos.